Hello and welcome to Crisis What Crisis, a new podcast series designed to be a useful field guide as we all try to navigate and come to terms with a dramatically changed world. Whether personal, professional or both, crisis is without doubt the new shared experience. I'm Andy Coulson, a former newspaper editor, Downing Street Director of Communications and inmate of HMP Belmarsh. For the last 4 years I've been trying to put all my experience, the good and the bad, to use as a strategic advisor to business leaders. And I can tell you that the bad has been just as useful as the good. And that got me thinking that there are plenty of great podcasts out there where you can hear stories of success. There are far fewer where you can benefit from the experience of those whose lives have properly unravelled. So in Crisis What Crisis, I'll be talking to the embattled, shamed, courageous, ruined, damaged, resilient, unlucky and lucky survivors of crisis. Some names will be familiar, some less so. But our guests will talk about their experiences honestly, often with humour, but always in the hope that what they have to share might be useful to anyone facing down their own demons and challenges. Put simply, these are crisis stories worth sharing. Our guest today is Johnny Mercer, Minister for Defence, People and Veterans. A former Army officer himself, as a captain in 29 Commando Royal Artillery, he completed 3 tours in 4 years in Afghanistan. To say that during that time he was exposed to crisis would be somewhat of an understatement. His job as the leader of a fire support team was to place himself in the most dangerous of situations, often under fire, to coordinate attacks from air and land, where just the slightest error of judgment could have fatal consequences for him and others. Johnny experienced the full brutality of war. Indeed, he was described as the most combat-experienced terminal controller in the army at that time. As a result, he was witness to countless horrors, not least the death of his close colleague, Mark Chandler. Those experiences drove Johnny, who until then had never voted, to stand as an MP in a seat that even his own party thought was unwinnable. Having walked the line between life and death in the most visceral of ways, he now walks the corridors of Westminster as a man tipped as a future Prime Minister. Johnny, thanks for joining us today. As someone who spent 7 months at a time living out of a sleeping bag with rations and a shower fashioned from a plastic bag, I'm curious to know how you've coped with lockdown.
Lockdown has been okay, actually. So there's 2 sides to it. There's the side that is that the workload for the MP's offices, the local MP's offices, as you can imagine, has sort of gone through the roof because it's been such a difficult time for communities like mine in Plymouth. But on a personal level, look, I mean, I've got a young family. I don't particularly like being in London or working in Westminster. And so I've been able to be at home with my wife and children, getting into a good routine, getting up early, getting work done, and then being able to do exercise with my children and so on. Go for a surf in the evenings, and so that side of it's been okay. So I can't say it's not binary. It's not been excellent or terrible. It's different, and I've enjoyed the different nature of it.
We will talk, of course, about what you learned about crisis during your time in the army. But if you don't mind, I'd like to start at the beginning because your upbringing was an unusual one. You're one of 8 children. All of you brought up in a very strict Baptist household that you said almost destroyed your mind. You were given Martin Luther's surname as your middle name, no TV, very little contact with non-Baptists. You've written about that vividly in your book, We Were Warriors. But did that slower moving crisis, if you like, prepare you in some way for what you were to encounter as an adult, or did it leave you more vulnerable?
It's a really interesting question. I think there were aspects of it that made you very resilient. But there's no doubt about it. I think when I came to engage with the real world, if you like, outside of a fairly religious setup, it absolutely brought its challenges. In some ways I had it easier than others because I ended up getting a music scholarship and going to a boarding school. So I had more time away from home. But for some members of my family to sort of leave that environment at home, then go straight into basic training with the Royal Navy, aged 15 or 16, at the time of the Falklands War. The contrast between home life and the real world was pretty grinding and pretty difficult, and had an effect on us all in different ways. So I think in some aspects it made you very, very resilient. In others, of course, it increased your vulnerability enormously. And I think many of us have had to sort of meet that challenge in different ways as we've moved on in our lives.
Is that sort of work constantly underway, if you like? Is it a work in progress for you continually, or do you feel that your younger years and you now fully understand, fully processed, got it in the right place?
It's a work in progress. I think that mental resilience and mental fitness is something you work on every day. And I think that the more contemporary understanding we have of this, where actually, if you want to be fit and have a healthy body, you have to eat properly and do exercise and so on. Actually, if you want to retain a healthy mind, you need to spend time looking after it. And I'll be honest, I do that, of course. I found the transition from the military into politics a bit of a challenge. I find political life challenging. And my only real way of dealing with it is maintaining a strong mental balance. It is a work in progress. It's not something that is ever, you're over the top of the hill and that's it, it's all downhill. I just don't think life is like that. I think it's something you have to have the discipline and resolve to continuously work at. But if you do, you can almost cope with anything. The human conscience and the human condition can almost, can cope with the most extreme challenges. And I think if you work hard, and it's my prolonged message to those who struggle with mental health challenges, you can get better. There's this nonsense out there that once you have a mental health challenge, people don't want to admit it because that's kind of it. And, you'll have that for the rest of your life. That is not the case. I know hundreds of people who've got better and carry on a pretty normal life. So it's one of hope, really. The message I would have around mental health is one of hope and one of success, I think.
Your childhood and the mental health issues it created for you manifested themselves in a number of ways. A sort of constant argument in your head is how you describe it, but also an extreme obsessive compulsive disorder, incredibly difficult challenges for a young man, Johnny, and at a time when OCD in particular was not taken especially seriously. I suppose my question is how did you cope then?
When I look back on this stuff, and I look back to what I did later on in my life, in my 20s and 30s, in specialist units in the UK military and things like that. And actually, the hardest stuff I did was wrestling with OCD when I was growing up. Looking back on it now, and those who've had a similar condition will recognise this. The nights without sleep, endlessly checking whether it's taps or lights or whatever it may be, or trying to get things straight in your mind. The obsessive and compulsive nature of that condition is horrendous. I mean, the World Health Organization has it as the fifth most debilitating illness in the world. If you get OCD, and it's not, you don't have facets of it that affect different parts of your life. If you have obsessive compulsive disorder like I had it, it is extremely debilitating, exhausting, and unpleasant. And I just remember back to those days, and it was harder than anything I did in the military, was trying to keep on an even keel in those days. Absolutely.
What sort of therapy did you sort of undergo at the time? I think you've mentioned cognitive therapy.
Yeah, so that's what
antidepressants.
That's what really worked for me. So a combination of a medical intervention and something called cognitive behavioral therapy, which enabled you to kind of work through the machinations of how your mind works. And the medical side of that, I found kind of just took the edge off the compulsions and enabled you to have the space to put into effect, to put into practice some of the techniques you learn in a good CBT course. And that's what really sort of got me over the hill. So, I was incredibly lucky. I mean, this happened to me quite late on, so I had a good sort of 20 years of wrestling with this. But I found that worked for me. It's something that I continue to manage now. But I think there's there's still a lot of misunderstanding around mental health challenges. We talk about it a lot more now, which is brilliant. No one talks about it when I was a boy. And the only reason I speak up, even now I'm sweating talking to you about OCD.
Because of the recollection, or
because of the recollection, because it makes me very uncomfortable, but also because I'm talking about personal issues in a public forum. But if there had been someone like me talking out 20 years ago, when I was 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, it would have changed my life. And so that forces me to speak out and to talk about my experiences, however uncomfortable and embarrassing and so on they may be.
You tried briefly life in the city once you'd left school, but decided quite early that the army was the career to pursue. Having already experienced a fair amount of crisis in your life, to put it mildly, what led you to think, I know what I need now, a war? What was the thought process that led you towards, what some might describe as kind of the ultimate crisis?
So I think definitely one of the areas of challenge. I mean, there's a lot of functions to army life. It's not what a lot of people seem to think it is. There's a lot of different facets to it, whether it's the friendships, the relationships, the sport, the professional challenge. I guess one of the real things that drew me in, I did look at myself at that time, and I felt very limited by what was going on around OCD and things like that. And I just thought to myself, what is the hardest job you can do in combat? And the idea of controlling jets, aeroplanes, helicopters, and so on, whilst continued in a close combat engagement, was in my mind at the time. I thought, do you know what? If I could do that, that would be my Everest, if you like, because of the condition that I had. And so that was a part of it. But also, as soon as I got involved with the military, I've been surrounded by some very special people. So the military is a huge organization. We have our challenges as much as anybody else. But the people I met along that journey just kept me going through what it was. So I never grew up wanting to be in the army.
Military family, though.
Military family. So my brothers went into the Navy, but that was very much a case of kind of getting out of home at the earliest opportunity. You know what I mean? Rather than a deep commitment to the nation.
But you also have a relative who won the VC, right?
He was my great uncle or something. Was a guy called Jack Cornwall, and there's a massive picture of him up on the wall down at Dartmouth, where naval guys go to do their training. So there is an element of military history, but I must be honest, it wasn't, as I was growing up, I couldn't see, if you'd have told me I'd have gone on to have a 14-year career in the military, I wouldn't have really believed it.
So just trying to join the dots, having confronted, the mental health issues that you had at that stage, and together with the sort of the reality of your upbringing, you had worked out, and frankly, at a very young age, you'd worked out that the best way to deal with this is to just keep creating new challenges for yourself. That you needed to find something harder to be able to kind of deal with what you already kind of had inherited, if you like.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to conquer it. I just wanted to beat it. I felt like it was an opponent, and at times that's not overly helpful, because you learn to kind of live with it and manage it. But yes, I wanted to be able to show that I could have a normal life.
But a normal life, Johnny, would have taken you for most people listening to this, I think that the normal life path would have been to go and do something easier, right? There are 1,001 other different roads you could have taken, that all of them would have been a lot easier towards what most people would recognize as normality, but you didn't.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, everybody's normal is very different, isn't it? Because for me, I would find it very difficult. I did work in the city for a very brief period of time, and I found that challenging, but obviously not in the same way as the military. I see what you mean, but once I became set on this ambition to be able to live a normal life with OCD, that was, and I saw the military as a vehicle to do that. I was committed, and then once I was in, it becomes so, particularly early on in training, it was pretty difficult, the routine that I took. And once you're there, I mean, you're not going to quit, right? I mean, that is like
this
the number
is the
one
all arms commando.
No, this is Royal and Company before Sandhurst. So basically, if you go to Sandhurst, which is the Royal Military Academy, you obviously you go there to be an officer. But generally, they have historically recruited people who are sort of 25, 26, 27 with a degree behind them. I was 19 years old, no degree, and what they do is they send people like me on an extra course. It's quite funny, really, because they teach you how to use a knife and fork properly. I'm not joking, and things like that. It's interesting, but also they put you through the mill a bit to see if you actually want to do it. Something called Rallying Company. It doesn't happen anymore. 42 of us started, 12 of us finished, but it was undoubtedly the best thing I ever did, and crucially taught me what I was capable of. So it filled you with quite a lot of confidence, but at the same time where your limitations were, and having the humility to accept that. And that was a very formative time for me.
We should explain, because you mentioned the scholarship earlier, that you were a music scholar. You were also, of course, a choir boy, and you were runner up, I think I'm right in saying, in the national choir boy competition. Presumably another crisis in your life is when your voice broke.
Do you know what? I was quite relieved, because it didn't break for a long time. I mean, it took me quite a while to develop physically, should we say. And when it did break, I think I was quite relieved. But look, I was very proud of what I did back then, and it opened doors to me. I was the first, to have those opportunities, because I worked hard at singing, and that was the gift I was given. I was very grateful to have that opportunity, and it opened doors for me that were not I simply wouldn't have been able to go to a school like Eastbourne College had I not got a pretty hefty music scholarship. So these things were all about opportunities, and I took mine.
So that's you talked about the challenge, kind of rationale, if you like, in terms of your decision to go into the army. Where did the leadership bit come from, though?
You know what? I was sat in the woods with a couple of guys from Hereford, doing some preparation for Sandhurst, who lived near me when I was in Sussex. And these were serving special forces, Hereford guys, and they were talking about what life was like, and I actually wanted to join up as a Tom, what we call a Tom, going as a ranker, because I wanted to do that side of things first. But they said, actually that's a little bit disingenuous. If you are good enough to do the leadership and command piece, get into Sandhurst and do all this other stuff, do the arduous courses and serve in these units, then you should go and do it. It's a privilege to lead, and if you have it, then you should. It's kind of disingenuous not to go and do it. And I just felt that I've always had this kind of leadership thing in me, through sports days at school or whatever it may be, through to early days in the military and so on. I've never wanted to be, sort of king of the castle, if you like, and a general in the military or whatever. But I do enjoy small team, intimate team environments, intimate leadership opportunities at the small team level, at the junior command level, and I was really lucky, because once I got in, obviously with the way UK foreign policy went, I was given plenty of opportunity to practice that on the battlefield.
You write in the book about the chaos of Afghanistan, and you're very critical, frankly, of the government's policies of that time. You say that they set Helmand back 30 years. How quickly did the chaos of it all become apparent to you? You're once there, and how did you adjust to that chaos?
It was complete madness because when we first went in, and this was after Iraq, so I didn't serve in Iraq. They did Iraq, and the sort of horror stories were starting to come back of individuals giving up their body armor and then getting shot and all this. And then we went to Afghanistan, and I went in the early days. And I just remember heading out there, and we were equipped, but we had nothing like the equipment of later years. So we had what was called ECBA, which is basically the sort of a stab vest, essentially, with a plate in it. That was our body armor, and it was just little things like that. I remember going to a meeting, a shura. I was in charge of training an Afghan Kandak, which is an Afghan company. And so it was myself, a Royal Marines sergeant, and 3 Royal Marines corporals, and then me and 92 Afghans. And we used to go for meetings with these guys, and blue on blues were happening all the time where, obviously the way the Afghan army grew, we couldn't vet people properly. So there were clearly talibs in the ranks. And we would go to meetings, and there was, you can take your weapon in because you're rifling, because it kind of spoils the atmosphere a bit. But there was nothing else available. There were no pistols, there were nothing. And I remember my boss saying to me once, Johnny, just take a knife. That's all we've got. And I was just thinking to myself, it's just not really the way of doing business that I envisaged for a military that had spent a long time in Northern Ireland, had a very prestigious history, the very chaotic nature of it, which came down to planning in a way, I found difficult to cope with. And then the knock-on effect that had on our people. So we put our people in positions that I just to this day don't think it is fair to have put them in, and it has had a lifelong effect on them.
You stuck with it though, and on one tour you worked very closely with special forces. Your job essentially to help them identify and then capture the most dangerous of Taliban targets. Capture was often not an option, and you were part of countless missions that killed. On one occasion, again in the book, you describe how you guided a missile to directly strike an armed mullah. Necessary but horrific work, Johnny. How do you rationalize those experiences now?
I really don't see it as horrific work. I thoroughly enjoyed it. There were aspects of it, of course, that were challenging, and that's why you do it. But at the end of the day, there's some pretty bad people in this world. And there were some pretty bad people in Afghanistan doing some pretty horrendous things. And we were engaged in mortal combat. And if I was not to take the opportunities presented to me, as sure as eggs were eggs, they'd take theirs. And I just don't dwell too deeply on these things. I think... You didn't then and never. No, I mean, even less then, because you're there to, I try and get away from these rather sort of crap phrases like you're there to do the job and so on, but it becomes kind of visceral, it becomes a kind of animal existence, and you want to go, you want to get out the door. If some guys have been whacked by an IED and people have been killed and so on, you want to go and find the guys who did it. And I don't buy into any of this rubbish that, these poor people, they haven't got any other opportunities other than to lay bombs and blow people up. I just never bought into that. I think there are some, my heart bleeds for Afghanistan because there are some amazing people in that country. But the reality is there are some people that some of these countries' enemies who are better off dead. That's the reality, and they are unreconcilable They wake up every day to try and do us harm. And, back in this country, we don't like that. It's a very unpleasant conversation, and we want to put them through programs and all the rest of it. The reality is that some of these people are unreconcilable. And what we ask our people to do in order to protect the freedoms and privileges that we enjoy in this country is often people don't like to think about it or talk about it. And I think it's a huge mistake, and it speaks a lot to the gulf, in my view, in the relationship between the political and the military in this country, that I must say is getting better, but what ultimately drove me into politics.
I mean, you were, if you're looking for, as you just did, described it very well, that kind of motivation to get out to work every day, albeit your work being, so tough. You're putting yourself on the line every day. I mean, you were blown up 3 times, right? I mean, you were in vehicles that were blown up by IEDs 3 times, and it's only purely by luck and by virtue of the vehicle that you were in, presumably, that you survived.
Yeah, I mean, this was in a later tour, where we were in a particularly bad place, and I mean, but when one of the reasons I found that not thinking about it helped in a way was because I just felt luck had such a role to play in all this stuff. I survived those 3 incidents, and to be honest, I had no effects from it at all. But I know people who didn't, and all I can think of that separates me and them is luck. I mean, if you're standing on an open road and someone engages you from 25 meters away with an automatic weapon, so they've seen you on the road with someone else, and they don't take aimed shots, they spray it. And the guy next to you gets shot through the face and is instantly dead, and you're not. There's nothing to, there's no point thinking too deeply about it, because it is just luck. Could that be you? Yes, absolutely. But it's not. So let's get on with it.
So you used the word luck. Did you ever use the word fate?
Sure about all this fate stuff. I think that puts too much of a planning nuance on it. I think it's just luck. I know. One of my friends. I have this conversation with him almost every time I see him, because in my view, he is one of the luckiest men in the world. He's got an outstanding combat record. He's still serving. But in my view, he is incredibly lucky. He will say, but if you do your drills and skills properly and you watch what you're doing, you reduce your chances and so on. That is true. But ultimately, the ultimate hand is luck. And so there's no point getting too upset about it. Anything, even in politics, Andy, the ultimate hand is luck. Whether you're in the right place at the right time, whether you're the sort of person people want to elect, whether you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, when a scandal's coming down the road and someone's going to cop it, it's luck. And far better people than me have ended up dead. And it's sad, but it's kind of life, right? Particularly in the military.
What did you see in the way that others reacted to crisis? One soldier, is shot, but it hits his armored plate and he can't cope or process it, as you describe. Another, Sergeant Major, I think, gets shot in the neck and had to be held back from going back into the firefight. Yeah. What did you learn about people in the way that they and the different ways that they react to crisis?
When there is a genuine crisis, and people have different kind of views of crisis, right? So in politics, crisis is the minister's tie wasn't straight in an interview, right? Yeah. It's ridiculous. When you hit real crisis and real fear, there's 2 things I learned. One is that it is no respecter of rank, authority. It all comes down to character. And the second thing is that courage is as contagious as fear. So if you can, one individual can change the dynamic of what's going on.
Give me an example of that.
When I was involved in a fatal shooting, and once these Talibs know that they've killed someone, they know that you're not going to leave that body behind. So they will try and overrun your position. So they phone all their mates on their shitty little radios, and they're all saying, go here, do this, cut them off. We've got the infidels and all this rubbish. And at that moment, particularly when someone's been shot and they're not mortally injured, so it's not a rush, it's not a like fight against time to stem the blood coming out of them or something. They're just switched off. Their lights have gone off.
Yes.
The shock that goes round the guys is palpable. And at that moment, you can have a critical effect on what is going on by either kind of leading by example, which I think is always the best way, or just kind of pulling the situation round. And different people react in different ways. For me, there is only one way to react, because I think if you react in the opposite way, more people get killed and the situation gets worse. So it's not through any kind of noble, I'm better than this, I'm going to do it this way. It's just because I want to live as much as anybody else, and I want to get out of there as much as anybody else. And so that's what brings I think that's what the leadership thing is. It's even through to my life now, people think when I speak out in politics, they think why is Johnny doing this? He wants to be in the newspapers or anything like that. Actually, I'm just thinking, do you know what? I don't want to be in a Conservative Party that gets ridiculed for not being able to deliver Brexit or not being able to do X, Y, and Z. That's the only motivation for it. I have no, it's not to put yourself on a pedestal. And I think that's what leadership is about. It's about being in those challenging environments and being willing to try and change it.
You've touched on it, but can we go to June 8th, 2010? I don't think any description I can give here, Johnny, would come close to communicating, the horror of that day. In your words, what do you remember of that morning?
I remember it was a very bright morning. I remember that it was another patrol. So we were in a routine of going out every morning, because we
should explain that when you say we, it is you, and in the main two others.
Yeah, in the main two others.
Mark Chandler, who was known as
a guy called Mark Chandler, who was kind of my right hand man, and a guy called Baz Barracliff, who was who helps me with the coordination of the air assets. And what we would do would bolt on to different patrols as they go out, because the patrols are going out all the time. And once you come under contact with the enemy and you start getting into a gunfight, obviously it is very difficult. The only real way to end that and to break it off is to bring down overwhelming force and break the contact. And that's basically what I spent that summer doing. So this was another morning. Myself, Baz, and Bing woke up. We went to another patrol base. And we just went out on patrol, and it was a standard, pretty relaxed patrol. We can feel the atmospherics changing as you can kind of feel something in the air. I knew
you're walking along a road you'd walked along before, or is this?
No, we were pushing into a different area. I mean, you don't generally walk along the roads. We would sort of push from irrigation ditch to irrigation ditch, because the IED threat is so high. You avoid everywhere where you think that the enemy think you're going to be, right? Yeah. So this is why it became such a ridiculous, dangerous game, because as soon as you come under contact, your immediate reaction is to get into cover and get into a ditch. The trouble is all the ditches are lined with IEDs, so you would sort of move from you try and think like the enemy were thinking the whole time, and move in places where they wouldn't think you would move, if that makes sense. And we were essentially pushing into an area. We became aware the Taliban were watching us, because they all get up early and pray and then like to go for a fight. I could feel the atmospherics changing. Women and kids started being ushered out of the buildings as we passed them, continued to move into the sort of enemy territory. And then we were pretty sure we knew where the enemy were. And what we were going to do was send one force in one direction to draw the enemy's attention and a bit of firepower. And then myself and a small team were going to kind of flank them and get in there and deal with the enemy position. The trouble is it all went according to plan right up until the enemy saw us about 20 meters from them. And we were very exposed. Myself and Bing Chandler were very exposed, and just got opened up on. Very heavy weight of fire, very loud, very noisy. Bing was killed instantly. And yeah, I mean, that's the kind of moment, whether you know, where you earn your stripes. I've always thought that, you know, your rank and stuff is just a bit of embroidery, really. You have to live it. And, you know, and I felt that I had to at that time. Bing was killed. I had to get him off the road. Really,
it was more than that, Johnny, because that assessment of it is characteristically self-effacing. But the truth of it is that you then put your own life in mortal danger to knowing that Bing was dead to retrieve his body, and that was a decision that you made instantly.
Yes, but that's not because I thought that I wanted to do that. I did that because no one else was going to do it, and I wanted to get the fuck out of there. You know, it wasn't like I don't know. It's hard to explain, because you hear of people afterwards and they talk about their time in combat, and they're like, yes, I stormed the enemy position with grenades because I was thinking about my regiment and stuff like that. I've got to be honest, my time in Afghanistan, the stuff I did was largely about self-preservation, right? So if I didn't go and get big, nobody else was going to do it. We were going to get surrounded and more people were going to get killed. And I just thought to myself, if I did not sort this situation out, you know, we were going to be in a whole load of trouble. And just on this, actually, since I wrote the book, it's really interesting, because the guy in front of me, so I was working with this guy in front of me who had a machine gun to try and get some rounds down into this enemy position to stop this idiot from firing at us. And he was very shocked by what had just happened, which I totally understood. But I was screaming at him to get the rounds down with what's called a mini-me machine gun. He fired two. And I thought, right, now he's got to do it now. So I ordered him to engage rapid fire into this building. And he fired one round, he got a stoppage. And as I got out onto the road, his weapon stopped. And I was like, oh, man, you know, I'm definitely going to get shot now. And this is really going to hurt. In the end, it all missed me and I got in. And, you know, the story is what it is. He wrote to me 6 months ago.
Right.
And it was amazing. I got this letter. He showed me, he sent me pictures of his kids. He said, I remember that day like it was yesterday. You know, he said some very nice things about me, which I won't repeat. But I thought, that's why you do it. That's why you do it. And it's for people like that I continue in this job now, because I think they deserve a little bit better from the nation. And that, you know, and I never, you know, when you go into public life, you don't know which way it's going to go. But I've had a few letters like that, but that one really struck me, that someone would remember that day so clearly and our little role in it. And yeah, it was extraordinary. It really moved me.
The self-preservation bit you've explained really well, but it did go further than that. You know, I mean, this is someone that you'd work with. This is someone you're incredibly close to in Mark. Someone whose job, in fact, was a highly skilled soldier himself, but his job primarily was to keep you safe so you could do yours. And you're now, as you describe it very vividly in the book, you're now, you know, holding him in your arms, trying to get him, you know, into the back of an armored vehicle and away from there. And although, you know, you've explained, as I say, that the sort of self-preservation element of it, I think anybody listening to this will be full of admiration, I hope, but also an appreciation, but also will, I think, struggle to compute how you manage to function. Right? Although it's your job, although you're trained, although you've had all that, in the end, you're a human being, you know, with a good friend lying dead in your arms.
Yeah, I mean, that was undoubtedly the hardest part, was dealing with him. So there's a kind of, when someone dies instantly like that, there's a period where they're not kind of dead, they're not cold, they're kind of warm, and they're on their way. There's nothing there, there's nobody there, but it is horrendous. It's absolutely horrendous. And I remember, like, we got him in, we wanted to get him into the back of an armored vehicle. So we fought our way out. I think it was about, I can't remember now, about a kilometer extraction under fire. I was absolutely gipping and I was exhausted. But we got him back to a vehicle, and he was quite tall, so we couldn't get him in. So we put him in the back of the vehicle, but we couldn't shut the door. And then I just thought, sod it, I took all my kit off. And I got in the back and I cradled him like a baby. It took about 40 minutes to get back to base because we kept on getting whacked on the way back. And so it was just me and him in the back of this armored vehicle. And I was literally like cradling him like a baby. And yeah, he wasn't cold, he was still kind of there, but asleep. And yeah, horrendous, absolutely horrendous. Yeah, I mean, there's, how do you do it? You think about lots of different things. I thought about how I would like people to look after and fight for me. I thought about his family very much. But you know what? I also thought a lot about my predecessors. And this is something that I thought about a lot there's other incidents in the book when I was cut off on my own and things like that. And I constantly thought of people from Korea or World War II who fought for the nation. The real, in my view, the real patriots. You get into politics and everyone reckons they're a patriot, and they go on about freedom of this, that, and the other. So these were real patriots, and it was and I thought of them, and I thought I didn't want to embarrass myself. I didn't want to embarrass the traditions and the values and the ethos that they upheld. And yeah, that was a big motivational factor for me. I was a commando, and and I thought about my predecessors a lot.
What's astonishing is that not long after, I mean, literally in the same day, you're back at work. I mean, you're not on patrol, but you are overseeing operations from base. Your job is to guide in helicopters and missiles, and there you are back doing that job, within a couple of hours.
Yeah, but it's kind of if you don't do it, nobody else is going to do it, right? It's a bit like, in some ways, it's like why I became an MP, because if I feel like if you're not going to do it, like you can't really complain. So if I didn't get on with the rest of my job the rest of that day, nobody else was going to do it. We would be unprotected from people who are trying to overrun the base all the time, and it just wasn't an option. I just didn't. The thought of sort of sitting on your Bergen and breaking down, it's just not an option, and everyone handles this stuff differently. But I never saw that as an option, and so I can't really get over why I didn't take that course of action and why I just carried on, because not carrying on was never an option.
So how did you manage the trauma while still managing to continue to do the job in the sort of weeks? I know you went back, obviously, not that long after, and the first thing you did was to see Mark's parents. But once you're back doing the job again, how are you managing the trauma, if you like? Because you've got grief, but you also say that you've got guilt, as well. How are you managing those things? I think, in terms of the techniques that you were using, Johnny, how did you kind of get through the days?
So there's an element of guilt there, I think. But There's not a lot you can do about that. Honestly, I was really, really scared when I first went back out on patrol, because there's something about someone just having their lights switched off. It's not a blood everywhere fighting for their life. There's something quite frightening about somebody just having their lights turned off, getting shot in the face. And for my first few patrols, I was very, very scared. And that's when you really earn your money, because you have to have the discipline, the self-discipline to control that fear and do your job. And that was a period of acute challenge for me.
Did people treat you differently? Did your colleagues treat you differently?
People did treat me differently in Afghanistan, because there was a kind of there was a little bit of a mythology built up, I think, around me and my team, which I found very difficult, because as far as I was concerned, a lot of it was just luck. Like, we were in the busiest patrol base, right on the front line of all the Talibs who'd been pushed out of Marja by the Americans. And yes, we were skilled with our engagements, but there was a hell of a lot of luck involved. And then consequently, people hear about your exploits and things. And even now, you still feel like a bit of a fraud, because there's so much luck and there's so much dependent on other people.
You had this reputation for accuracy and bravery, but there were mistakes as well, which you were you've been very honest about. When you got things wrong, for you, of course, getting something wrong, getting some coordinates wrong could have deadly consequences. What was your approach? How did you deal with mistakes?
So as soon as I realized, so I made a bad mistake one day and interspersed 2 different digits and landed an explosive in the wrong place. I didn't kill anyone, but it was a big mistake. And I think, when that happened for me, you just got to kind of put your cards on the table, and you just got to be, look, I've made a mistake. And because I hate bringing this back to politics, but the cover-up is always worse. I mean, if people know what you've done, everybody knew what had happened. There's nothing worse than someone who can't face up to the reality of their situation. And it does require courage, and it does require self-examination. But you know what? The best thing I learned in the military was not all this stuff that everyone thinks. The best thing I learned was my own limitations and what I could not do, and what were my limits and what were my lines, and the things it teaches you about yourself. And you have to have the humility to accept it when you get something wrong. Doesn't mean it's all over. Doesn't mean it's terminal. But you have to have the integrity to do that. Otherwise, how on earth do you hold other people to account? How on earth do you maintain these standards that you're trying to hold everyone to, if you can't even have the courage and resilience to deal with your own shortcomings?
You were witness to kind of the first efforts at proper mental health support in a combat zone, the TRIM process. Yeah. What do you remember about it, Johnny?
I mean, at the start, it was a bit of a joke, to be honest. And we're all to blame. Look, we are all to blame for that. The way we took mental health and the way we dealt with mental health and the footing we had mental health on, I think we are all to blame, including myself, for not taking it seriously enough. I think, I think people tried very hard in the early days, but I didn't take it particularly seriously. Do you know what? I didn't really take it seriously until I saw catastrophic breakdowns from people on the battlefield. And it's really not really good enough from me, because I think the issues around mental health have been well known for a while, and it should not be the sort of issue that people understand simply because it's happened to them or someone they know. That's kind of 1950s thinking, right? mental health, clearly we understand it a lot better now, and we try and treat it like having a physical health problem. But I think I was as guilty as anybody else of not really understanding things like battle fatigue and things like that until I saw it. And I regret that very much.
But it also sowed the seeds of your decision to move towards politics, right?
It did, because I thought to myself, what I found really difficult to deal with was the contrast between how leaders in our country talked about military service and talked about valuing these people and talked about pride and professionalism. The contrast between that and the reality for a lot of people who came home from those conflicts was too great for me. And it's really hard to explain, but once you've been through these experiences, it becomes very hard to and you realize how lucky you are. It becomes very difficult to let it go. And I came home in 2010 from that tour, and in 2012, more of our guys took their own lives and were killed in the conflict. People still weren't talking about it. I could not believe it. And I was like, this has to change. When are these guys going to understand? From Prime Minister downwards. And it wasn't really the Prime Minister who, David, who you and I know and so on. I know that he got this kind of stuff. But there's some sort of institutional handbrake going on when it came to looking after veterans in this country. And I thought, the only way I'm going to change that, I'm going to become a member of parliament, and I'm just going to bore everyone to tears on this issue until we actually get somewhere. Like you say, for most people in this country have nothing to do with politics and have no idea where to turn. And I was one of those people.
You've met some politicians. I think actually we might even have been helmet at the same time when I visited with David Cameron, right?
So you came on a visit when I was with doing some stuff with a specialist unit in 2008. You came out and visited our compound.
That's right, with the dogs.
And I with the dogs, that's right. And David was there, and William Hague was there as well. But we met others who
we should explain these are Special Forces dogs. One of the most astonishing things I've ever seen.
And they and obviously I was impressed by David and William and others, but I did feel there was a significant gap between what they were told and what they thought we were doing and the reality of foreign affairs and foreign conflict. And that was fine, and up until the point that it impacted on people's lives, where they couldn't get the mental health support they needed, where they might get a nice set of prosthetics for their first year, but how were they going to live the remainder of their 60 years with no idea where they were going to get their prosthetics from? And and I just I thought I'm afraid I've always had a pretty dim view of politicians, not from that specific visit, I must say. But
that's fine.
I honestly, mate, I'm
interested actually, because I remember the visit, and I was sort of acutely aware that this is a bunch of politicians and some of their advisors, me included, being dropped into what was essentially a kind of day visit, there. And I remember sort of looking at you guys, and you can see you're living it, and you're thinking, why on earth am I having to spend my time having to chaperone these people around? What did you make of the politicians in that environment?
Environment,
it wasn't the only time. There were plenty of others.
And I'm not just blowing smoke, but David was very good with the guys, right?
Yeah,
he was very good with the guys. And so that was a much more comfortable experience. Okay, there were others who I don't want to sort of drop in the poo, and it was a nightmare. It was a complete nightmare. We would show. You had a standard presentation when you came out, and within some of that presentation will be predator footage of the guys on target doing what we need to do, right, to either detain these guys or whatever. And a very, very prominent guy at the time asked us to turn the footage off. He didn't want to see it. And, the guys were like, well, hang on, we're kind of out there doing this for you, and you won't even watch it on TV.
You don't even want to watch the film.
And it was that combined with the warm word. The warm words really got me, like on Remembrance Day and things like that, and how people would say, we owe a massive debt to these people. And I was thinking to myself, yeah, but you've got absolutely no intention of ever paying it. I found warm words from politicians very, very difficult over the years.
How did you find the relationship with the public? Because there were times, there have been times, still are, one would love to think, that where the sort of connection between the British military and the British public is what it should be. But there are times when it's not as well.
So in my view, the British public absolutely bailed us out. If you remember the explosion and growth of some of the service charities, when we saw the level of casualties coming back.
Yes, exactly. Stepped into the bridge.
Yeah, all of this stuff, right? The British public have always got it, in my view. Extraordinary efforts to raise money and to care for these people. But there has been a mental block in Whitehall for decades about where the line is as to who looks after these people. And the problem is it's totally distorted the debate, because charities, to raise their money, clearly have to talk about how soldiers are injured and so on. The vast majority of us leave completely enhanced by our experiences, had a great time, but there is a small minority that we need to look after. And then the British public starts to get a different view of what military service is about. And, and it's about coming out injured and unwell and all this nonsense, which is totally the opposite to the truth. In my view, we've been bailed out as a country by the great British public over and over again. And that's, that brings us to an interesting point today where overt operations like Iraq and Afghanistan are in the decline. And so public giving is in the decline to service charities, but the need continues to go up. And this is why I was so keen when Boris became Prime Minister to get him to commit to these commitments that he has done. Because we're at a seminal moment where there does need to be more of a shift towards state provision. It's no good just saying we have a duty to these people, we respect what they've done. You actually have to provide something meaningful that will affect their lives, and we are beginning to do that.
You joined the dots incredibly quickly when you decided, I'm leaving the army and I'm going into politics. There were some jobs in between, obviously, to fund your campaign, including on a building site and an advertising campaign that perhaps we should just sort of gloss over here, John.
Yeah, let's gloss over that.
But the decision was immediate. I'm leaving the army. I've identified the problem that I want to play a part in solving, and I'm getting into politics.
Yeah, it was really, and it's been a constant source of friction for me ever since, because I don't understand people who don't go into politics with a cause. I just don't see the point of it. I don't understand people who get to a certain stage and think, I'm going to go into politics now. That looks like a good way of life. It's kind of two different ways of looking at a coin. For me, politics.
Where do you see the balance right now?
Politics is a vehicle
between those career politicians, as you're describing them, and people who you think are going into politics with the right frame of mind. Well, it's really difficult because I don't, and I've given interviews in the past where I've sort of tried to describe this with greater or lesser extent, and I don't want to offend anybody, but I genuinely don't understand why you would just become a sort of politician and choose that as a way of life and just want to be a minister in any department just because you liked being a minister. I just don't understand it. For me, politics is literally a vehicle for getting things done, and for changing people's lives and making the system work for people who need it to work. And that I saw that very clearly from the beginning. Now, don't get me wrong, there have been a number of heavy collisions in my journey into politics. One was with the Conservative Party when I first joined, but absolutely not interested. Never won in Plymouth Moor View. Thought I was slightly deranged for thinking I could win. Wanted you, in fact, to spend your time and efforts campaigning for
elsewhere,
in a neighbouring seat.
Basically didn't want me, which I obviously completely understood, but thought was a little bit unfortunate. And it's been like that ever since. I've had to kind of kick the door down and come in my own way, and that has very much shaped my experiences and my views as to what's going on.
So you touched on this earlier, but just to get back to the theme of crisis, you're arriving in Westminster, which British politics is, of course, a rolling crisis. When you've walked that line, as I said earlier, between life and death, how do you get motivated for the sort of day-to-day ups and downs of politics, the game-playing elements? There are, of course, some deeply rewarding days, but there's a load of nonsense as well, isn't
there? Yes, of course. It's very difficult. It's not enjoyable. But the trouble is, Andy, for idiots like me who actually believe in something, you'll kind of put up with almost anything to achieve what you're trying to do. So the trouble is, I believe in this cause so much. I genuinely believe that these people I served with on operations are the best of us. And I genuinely believe that they deserve better from this nation. I genuinely believe that we should not be endlessly trying to prosecute people who've served on operations and hand them over to human rights lawyers just to make money. I genuinely believe this stuff, that you'll almost take any hits in order to achieve that. And that's the problem, because it becomes like military training in a way. Like once it gets difficult, you're never going to quit, right? You're never going to quit. And so in politics, I know I'm just going to hang on until I've achieved these things. I may get sacked. I may not get sacked. I may lose friends. I may make friends. But one thing I know is that I will keep going, because these people, in my view, deserve it. And the support I get outside of politics and outside of Westminster is like that guy writing to me I told you about. That made my year. And then for me, that's what it's all about. I have absolutely no illusions how unpopular I am in Westminster amongst my colleagues and other people. I've had to do it all very differently to them. I haven't waded around in unwinnable seats or been in the Tory party for 20 years or have a picture of Margaret Thatcher on my wall. I get it. But it just doesn't bother me, because I'm here to achieve for other people that I care about. And so, when you're in that mindset, I actually find it a lot easier, because the sort of day-to-day crises you're talking about there, they just don't really bother me. Do you know what I mean? So there are things that really bother me that,
So how do you actually react then? Because it's also, politics is also a team sport, right? You're a government minister, and you're part of a team, and there's a whole bunch of kind of expectations around that. So when you're seeing, what your colleagues are considering to be a genuine crisis, either for them or the party, and you're frankly chuckling to yourself because you know what a proper crisis looks like. How are you handling that?
Because as committed as I am to those causes, you also achieve nothing on your own. You achieve nothing on your own. And that is as true in politics as it is in anything else. And you have to be able to craft together teams and relationships in order to deliver your outcomes. If the party is in trouble or concerned about something, it wasn't in my best interests to describe Theresa May's government as a shit show. I can assure you, going to work the following week was pretty unpleasant. And, for whatever political career I may or may not have, that hasn't done me any favors. But you have to, if we're not going to win as a Conservative Party, if we're not going to be successful, then frankly, these ambitions I have around the military, yes, but these other things in Plymouth, poverty, life chances agenda, all these other things, they're never going to happen if the Conservative Party doesn't do well.
How are you feeling about the sort of 6 months ahead?
I think we're in for a very difficult time. If you see what has happened to the economy, and we've lost 20 years of growth in 3 months, I think some aspects of what has gone on will recover quite quickly. So down here in Plymouth, there's a lot of tourism and visitor economy, and with quarantine in place and things like that, I think you are going to get visitors coming back down here, and I think there'll be a quicker recovery. But in things like manufacturing and so on, I mean, we have to be configured to be kind of COVID secure going forward, and that is undoubtedly going to change. And it'll be probably hardest to change for businesses, small and medium-sized businesses, that is the backbone of the economy in places like Plymouth. So I think we're in for a tough time. We've got our work cut out, and never more do we need a competent, modern, compassionate Conservative Party. And I'm proud to be part of that. And I'll do everything I can to make sure we stay on the rails and deliver, not for ourselves, but for the people who need us to.
Johnny, thank you for your incredibly sort of powerful insights, really, in the conversation that we've had today. I'm really very grateful for you for the way that you approached it. Not least as, of course, you are waiting with bated breath for the arrival of your third child. I know it's due any moment. So that you took time out to talk to me today, I'm incredibly grateful. I've got one last question. We ask all our guests for their crisis cures. Yeah. 3 things that kind of help them through the dark days. Anything but another person. What are yours?
The 3 things are to help you through a crisis. One is maintenance of the aim, right? So maintenance of the strategic aim. So you have your goals and they have to be realistic. But once they are set, the key is to focus on those and not get distracted by the kind of niff, naff and trivia that seems a really important thing at the time. But actually, if you take yourself out of that position and you think strategically, to maintain that strategic focus, I think is very, very helpful.
So I want these as much as possible to be personal to you. So when you apply that,
so for me, that's what I do now. So when I'm under pressure now, when someone writes something horrible about me in the newspaper or whatever, I think about my strategic focus on how I'm trying to change this country's relationship with her military and her veterans.
Yes.
And I get a hard time, but at the same time, I've established the UK's first Office of Veterans Affairs. We have a Prime Minister who's committed to ending vexatious claims. We are making progress in these areas like we've never made before. Is it fast enough? I'd love to go faster, but that's not realistic. So maintaining a focus on the strategic picture. I think it's really important to have a perspective and to have a balance in your life, because so much is down to luck. So much, whether it's an accident, whether it's your career, whether it's war, luck has such a heavy hand to play that I think you need to bear all these things in perspective.
How do you get that balance?
How do I get that balance is by making sure my time is very mixed. So, for example, I've never bought a flat in London until very recently because I've now got 3 children. But in 5 years, I've been living out of hotels because I wanted, as soon as the flag was dropped in London and the 3-line whip was off, I wanted to get back to my family. Because for me, the family provides that balance. You know, when I'm here, I eat properly. I do a lot of exercise. We go to the beach together. We spend time together. And, you know, I'd rather listen to my, my daughter's homework than read the latest government lines on what's going on. I think that's really, really important. And the final bit I would say is accept in a crisis is to seize the initiative, really, to think that you're never going to be in crisis forever. So whatever situation you're going through, it's never going to last forever, right? So if you think of the situations I've been in or you've been in, you're not going to wake up every day like that movie and it's going to be Groundhog Day and you're going to be doing it like forever. So just get through it. Just do what you need to do to get through it. Don't flap about it. And things will, things will return to normal. You've just got to stick it out. And so in that regard, just never wrap, never give up. Don't even entertain that as an option. And things will always get better.
Very good. Johnny, thanks again for your time. Very, very much appreciated.
Pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Crisis What Crisis. Do feel free to send us your feedback. You'll find our contact details and our show notes giving you the key insights from our guests at crisiswhatcrisis.com. There are more useful conversations on the way, so please do subscribe. And if you like what you hear, give us a rating and a review. It really helps. Thanks again.